Reading and Writing About Informational Texts is the third unit in the middle school curriculum. If you're following the typical progression of units, you would have already done creating a text-based culture and introduction to interpretive work. And aside from 7th grade's texts about writing advice, this will probably be the first informational text or nonfiction that you are really digging into with your students. So a quick note about the placement of this unit. The informational text unit and the dealing with difficulty unit that follows have a lot of similarities in their structure and design. We place the informational text unit first because while the texts are challenging, the purpose of informational texts tends to be more straightforward than some of the literary texts that students will work with in the next unit. Students will also be introduced to a few exercises in this unit, like the search and study, that they will get a chance to use again in dealing with difficulty. In this unit, students will be working through many of the standards around both reading and writing informational texts. Here's the typical structure of this unit. Over the course of about 8 sessions at the middle school level, students read a set of paired texts about a common topic or theme. The texts themselves are reasonably complex in keeping with the grade level expectations, so we scaffold students' work with them across a couple of sessions and multiple readings. Once students have read through the first text and spent enough time in it to analyze it together, they move into their work with the second text, which incorporates some similar comprehension work and builds toward a writing task that requires students to draw information and ideas from both texts. Now I'm going to talk about the 6th grade unit in a bit of detail and then show the connections to the other grade levels, so don't just skip to your grade level yet, because some of the things I bring up with the first unit will apply to all of the others as well. 6th grade's unit is called Story and the Brain, and as you might guess, the two texts are focused on storytelling and how we as humans respond to stories that are structured in certain ways. The first text in particular discusses the ideas of conflict and a Freytag's dramatic arc, basically plot structure, and how these structures are used in advertising in order to hook people's attention. Because some of the vocabulary and the ideas will certainly be new to students, we introduce an exercise called the search and study. Now, in the first session, as you're reading the text together for the first time, students are asked to mark anything that stands out as new, unfamiliar, or confusing. And there's time in the closing meeting of that work to collect a list of the moments that students found challenging, or that they wanted more information about. We ask students to identify what it is that makes this moment challenging, so they can begin thinking about possible solutions. This is some deliberate metacognitive work. It's easy to get stumped by a text and to be stuck in that space of just thinking, I don't get it, it's too hard. But if we can move forward from that to just being able to point to some specific places that are challenging and say, I'm having trouble understanding this, and I'm having a hard time with it because of something in particular. Well, then we've got some productive steps we can take to move forward. We know these texts are challenging. The solution isn't to make the texts easier, but to acknowledge the complexity and help guide students toward productive methods of tackling this work. So in the next session, you have a chance to brainstorm possible ways of solving these difficulties and to help students prioritize which things will be most important. And then they set about searching for more information about their questions. This might be looking up vocabulary words, unfamiliar references, or some other similar things. They'll need access to devices of some sort for most of this work. And they consider not only what they learn, but also how that information helps them make sense of the text. In the closing meeting, all of the students share out what they were learning so everyone can learn from one another, and they reflect on their work. Now, the search and study is a strategy that shows up from time to time in our work, including in the next unit, and it serves as a way to help students gather additional background information that they might not already have. Instead of relying on our own assumptions about what students know and don't know, and trying to pre-teach everything ourselves, we can help students identify their own needs and give them space to gather that information and share it. Some texts, even complex ones, contain almost all of the information that a reader needs. But for those that don't, this is a handy method to use when background knowledge is a key part of the complexity. In the next session, students go back into the text with a question focused on the central ideas, similar to the interpretive questions of the previous unit, that allows them to dig into some of the bigger concepts of the piece. And then in the 4th session of the unit, students have a chance to apply some of these ideas by analyzing a set of advertisements. So you'll want to look at that session in advance and start collecting some ideas of recent advertisements that might be suitable for use in that session. After that, the second text is introduced, and students go through a similar cycle of comprehension work with it. Before session 8, you might choose to introduce the informational writing rubric with an intersession similar to that from the previous unit, and in session 8, students are given their final writing task. For this, they'll need to draw information from both texts, and you can expect this to stretch over more than one class period as students review the texts, plan their writing, and write their complete responses. As always, you can consider what next steps might make sense for your class at this time, whether you'd like them to do some editing and revision work with this piece, or whether they might file them away for use in their portfolios, for example. At 7th and 8th grade, what you're going to find is a very similar structure, with 7th grade examining a set of texts focused on technology and addiction, in which the second author is directly responding to the first, and 8th grade looking at the ideas of superstition and ritual, with students reading about the unusual habits of typically no-nonsense lawyers, and then examining these habits through the lens of the ideas presented in the second text. The search and study is a part of both of those units as well, and in 7th grade, students spend some time examining tone, where in 8th grade, they're looking at the author's use of structure. Both of these units also conclude with a task that requires students to write across both texts and explain key ideas using information from each. The repeated structure with these units is deliberate because comprehending informational texts isn't a matter of learning one particular skill or technique. It involves developing a mindset and certain habits of approaching a text, and the acknowledgement that there are always going to be difficult moments in a text. We can identify those, we can problem solve for them, and we can either seek out more information or discuss these moments with our peers in order to understand them, and we should always step back to ask ourselves what a text is really saying. As you plan this unit, take a look at the introduction, review how the search and study works, take a close look at the final writing task for your grade level, and then read through each of the texts in the student reader. Once again, they are complex, but students are given multiple class sessions to unpack them with a variety of strategies. So we encourage you to jump into the work and see what students' needs actually are, rather than trying to preempt every possible difficulty. You'll find that there is a lot of support built right into the work itself.